Evening, everyone. So I'm going to kick off today with the Russian interference line again. I did a video a couple of days ago, I think, with basically spurred on by a huge indictment published with lots of evidence of Russian interference in American politics, but also European and individually UK politics as well. So we're, in America, we're starting to see the American court system, the Department of Justice, basically talking about dealing with massive levels of Russian interference in their politics, in European politics. We know that there must surely have been an immense amount of Russian state interference in our own politics. Where we have a problem is that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, because we have a big problem in the UK, in that, as many people who follow UK politics will know, until very recently, we had a government that told our intelligence services, our security services, explicitly not to look for evidence of Russian interference in our politics. And we know that that is a fact. This isn't hearsay. This isn't like the Boris Johnson phrase, oh, did he say let the bodies pile high because it was someone claimed, or a few people claimed he did. We sort of believe it. Boris Johnson didn't really deny it, so we sort of think it's true. But we don't know for certain, right? There's a bit of deniability about it, not that he has denied it, as far as I know. But with this, we know that the government expressly told the intelligence services not to look for evidence of Russian interference, because a parliamentary select committee has found evidence of that, and it's in a report, and no one went mad. No, Theresa May didn't go, no, this isn't true at all. It's like, it is, it's on record, it's a fact. When we talk about, I do sometimes people will talk about release the Russia report. Why don't we release the Russia report? The Russia report has been released. It just didn't contain the information we would like to have known, which is what evidence is there of Russian interference? Well, there isn't any. There isn't any, because we haven't looked for it. Hopefully that's changing now. But what I want to come on to, because in America, they are now looking for evidence of Russian interference. And what is remarkable, and it seems like a minor thing at the moment. I'm going to explain why it's not a minor thing. If someone's saying there's no sound, there is sound. That will probably be, I don't know why I'm saying it to you audibly, because you can't hear me, you can't hear this. But it will be a problem at your end, I'm afraid. So there were a group of, shall we say, right-wing commentators in America who have been outed as being paid by effectively the Russian state through intermediaries, of course, to promote Kremlin talking points. And one of these people, one of these three gentlemen, Tim Pool, I saw this last night actually, but I had a proper listen to it this morning, explaining why, oh no, it's absolutely fine, it's nothing, there's nothing untoward. And part of his explanation, so there's basically a suggestion that this guy who runs a podcast, and he gets between 100 and 200,000 views an episode, which is pretty good. I wish I could do that. But he gets that, and he was trying to suggest, for the money that they were paid for these episodes, that it's the market rate. Now, this market rate would work out at roughly $100,000 an episode. Now, even I know, you are not getting $100,000 an episode for a podcast that gets about 100 to 200,000 views. Now, let's think. Now, obviously, I know a little bit about this. Let's think about the hierarchy of how you monetize social media content, including podcasts. Right. So at the bottom end is what I do. I'm at the very bottom end. You basically get ad revenue, which is automatically arranged, in my case, via YouTube. They do that. I don't have anything to do with it. Occasionally I get people emailing me and go, oh, we'd like to put an advert on your channel. I completely ignore them. Most of it's a scam anyway, but occasionally the realistic ones, the ones that might be real, it's like, no, I'm not interested in that. But so the lowest end is I get ad revenue based on what YouTube arranged. They take a cut of that. In theory, if you arranged your own advertisers and your own adverts, you could get a lot more. So just as a ballpark figure, if I get a video that gets 100,000, let's say 100, because he's saying between 100 and 200,000. So let's say 150,000. 150,000 would be worth 500 odd quid. Generally speaking, there are differences. Certain times of the year, advertisers are spending more than others. For example, in the last third of the year, we're just about entering the period where advertisers increase their rate a bit. They're competing a bit more. They're trying to advertise ahead of all the big commercial holidays coming up, particularly in America, much more so in America than here. So, you know, but for me, you could talk somewhere between £500 and £600 for something 150,000 views. And if you were getting your own advert, YouTube wouldn't get a cut out of it. I'd keep it all. So I'd be getting over £1,000. And then you think to yourself, well, if you can target, you know, if you've got a particular audience that a particular advertiser thinks is their target audience as well, you can charge a bit more. You can say, well, hang on a minute, I've got a lot of your potential customers all in one place. You could charge a bit more. And interestingly, someone who has multiple podcasts in America and has one particular podcast, this is Alison Gill, for those who know a lot about American podcasters. She was pointing out that her Muller, She Wrote podcast, so she runs like 4 podcasts. The Muller, She Wrote ones does the same, and she's posted proof of it, getting between 100, all of them are getting over 100,000 views an episode. And she was saying typically you would talk about $9 per thousand. So there you'd be talking about typically per brand, because you'll have multiple adverts through the podcast. So you'll get something like $900 typically for 100,000 views, or you might say $1,350 per brand. You have a few brands on there. She says fairly typically you might expect to get about $3,500 to $4,000. That's probably what you're looking at. So when Tim Pool claims that the market rate for a show getting between 100 and 200,000 views is $100,000 an episode, it's not just that he's claiming he's doing much better than someone who actually is a bigger player on the podcast stage in America. It's so far beyond it. If you've got someone saying, look, I get on this show, and she has more popular shows, if on this show I get about what you get, and I'm claiming I'm getting about $3,500 to $4,000 an episode, and this guy's claiming $100,000, it's so far out there, it's a complete lie, and it's an obvious lie. And the thing is, if you've got someone who's going out there, because they're being accused of basically shilling for Putin, right? They're basically being accused of taking money indirectly from the Kremlin, because it's not come directly from there. They say they've taken the money from an American corporation. In other words, there was some muling going on. And they're trying to say, no. Just because the things we've been talking about you might think, might also coincide with some of the things that Putin might say. No, these are all our genuinely held views, right? Why wouldn't you just come on and say that? If you come on and try to back your claim up by telling a ridiculously easy to prove lie, we know you're lying, which basically means they didn't even think to say something like that. It's absolutely incredible. It says, are you telling us you do not receive 100,000 for each live stream? Oh, the live streams wouldn't get 100,000 views anyway. But no, I mean, it's so far out there. So far out there. It's unbelievable. And it was interesting to see an actual podcaster in America who can claim to be producing stuff as popular or more popular saying, yeah, we don't get this at all. and it's utterly ridiculous. And so we know that there is, basically the point I'm trying to make is we know that there is Russian interference. First of all, the circumstantial evidence is so huge. Like, we had an army of Russian bots active during the Brexit referendum campaign. We had the same thing during the 2016 presidential election, 2020 presidential election. We will have it during the 2024 presidential election. We know we had an army of Russian bots pushing, for example, Reform UK during the 2024 general election in this country. And we know that a lot of the same people that push the same talking points in both America and Britain, as well as some other countries, are all connected by, for example, having worked for Russia Today. Remember, Russia Today only got binned in America and the UK after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, think about what that means. It basically means that the authorities in both countries basically knew what Russia Today was and still allowed it to continue. And we had senior politicians in this country and America who would contribute to be paid by Russia Today to push their lines. But all of this without a serious investigation, it's all like this huge pile of circumstantial evidence. And what we actually need is a proper investigation. We need an active investigation to make up for the years of telling the intelligence services not to investigate anything. We're starting to get it in America. I don't know to what end. I mean, what's going to be the result? It's going through the courts now. You've got all this evidence. What's going to be the result? If all they do is go after individuals in America who have taken money from the Kremlin in order to push disinformation, and that's it, doesn't seem quite enough. What needs to happen is you need a national discussion on this. There needs to be, you need to be able to say these people were pushing Kremlin lies, and therefore point out to politicians who are currently doing the same thing and saying, and they're probably the same. They're pushing the same lines. We just don't know they're being paid to do it, because there are some people who will do it for free. There are some politicians in America, just like the UK, who will do it for free because they're not, they get money from being a more prominent politician. Like in this country, for example. In fact, we've had Robert Jenrick trying to rein back a little bit, because he said this summer that he'd totally vote for Donald Trump if he was an American. Which is a slightly dodgy thing to say. Remember, even amongst conservative supporters, Donald Trump is not popular. We have actual Republicans, committed Republicans, former Republican, presidential candidates, Dick Cheney, the latest one, effectively saying they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. Because it's not, and Robert Jenrick, he's trying to rein back a bit now, and he's tried to justify it by saying, well, our sister party in America is basically Republican, so of course we lean more towards them. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. But at the same time, even in America, they understand, actual Republicans, senior Republicans, understand that this is not between the Democrats and Republicans this time. It's between someone who happens to be a Democrat and someone who wants to trash democracy, who should never, ever, at any time, 2016 or otherwise, have ever been the Republican nominee. But anyway, right, let's, okay, we'll go through some of the general comments. I had my little say on that. It says, have Labour said how they want to deal with Putin? As on other things, Starmer seemed a bit weak on this subject. Well, he hasn't said anything, if that's what you mean. Whether he's weak on it is another matter, because I don't, at the moment, it seems to me, and I've said this before, Labour seem to be utterly obsessed, and I mean obsessed in the literal sense of the word, with just trying to go, oh, Tories bad, made everything bad, terrible, and like with nothing else. And I've criticised this in terms of the fact that they're with the budget, they say, oh yeah, it's going to be an absolutely terrible budget, dreadful budget, and it's all the Tories' fault. It's like, yeah, that's fine, but there are some good things as well. The good things that's already happened that we know are in the budget, they've been announced. Why aren't you saying, but, although we've got to take these tough decisions, it's not all doom and gloom. We're able to do this, this and this. You know, Labour could credibly argue that they will have already put into motion more improvements for this country than the Tories did in the last 10 years. Like, why aren't they plugging that? And the same goes here. Like, you could argue that if they decided to order an investigation into Russian interference, they could then pin that on the Tories, because again, we know the Tories said do not investigate evidence of Russian interference. We know Boris Johnson was heavily compromised. There should be an investigation into that. James, we're going to inquiry or royal commission. Ooh, maybe not either. You can't. I suspect you probably shouldn't have a public inquiry into something that touches on security issues, because although obviously a public inquiry will be headed up by a senior judge who will know what they're doing, and they will be subject to this Official Secrets Act. And yes, of course, they're not going to discuss openly or publicly anything which could compromise national security. I just think for something like this, there would be so much of it. It's like the public inquiry wouldn't be very public at all with most of it. So maybe this isn't... is this a veiled plea for Super Chats? No, I don't have Super Chats turned on. I don't have Super Chats turned on. They're off. You can't do a Super Chat. I don't rule out in the future doing the odd... Because I may in the future do more live streams. In our sort of post-Tory period, I may do more live streams. And one thing, if I do more live streams, I may weave in once a week a more public live stream. Because at the moment, the only people that can type in the chat are members. Anyone can watch it, but members can type in the chat, for which you already pay for that. So I don't do super chats as well. That would be cheeky. But I may do a fully public, and I have done them on special occasions before, and I may do them in the future. But as people who've taken part in those live streams will know, I can't keep on top of the super chats. There's two problems with the super chats. The first is that it completely breaks the flow of the stream. And the problem with that is it's fine for people watching live and just having a chat. It's brilliant. But then for people watching not live afterwards, it's like it's too disjointed, and I can't like create a thumbnail or a title for it because like, what is it about? And the other thing is I just missed a load. There's too many. I missed them. I missed some. So I may do it in the future if I do more live stream, if I increase the level of live streaming. But that will be something I'd have to think very carefully about, because the downside to live streaming is quite nice in a way. I do like it. The downside is that you are then having to commit. Every live stream you do, you're having to commit to being available at that time. And it reduces the flexibility of being able to weave in work. And because being a YouTuber, I mean, I'll be honest, it's not exactly a hard life. It may be news to you. It's very, the work-life balance, there's a lot of hours goes into it, but if it's what you enjoy, then yeah. But it's very, very flexible. Like I can get up, sometimes I'm just wide awake at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'll get up and just do some work there, get some stuff done, and then I'm free later on to do other stuff. Sometimes I'll do a few hours in the morning, then I'll do something else. Then I'll do another few hours in the afternoon, do something else. Then maybe if I did more like things I wanted to do in the day, maybe I have to do some more in the evening. It's nice and flexible. More live streams you put in, you're scheduling things. So I have to be a little bit wary. But anyway, back to politics. Should Starmer release the Russia report unredacted? Well, you can't, can you? Because the redactions are anything to do with national security. You understand there are going to be a hell of a lot of redactions, which is why, as I say, you probably couldn't have a public inquiry. All we really need to know, we just need to know from the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary that MI5 and MI6 and anyone else who might be interested has now been told that they should look for evidence of Russian interference, and that if any emerges that implicates people in the UK, that there will be criminal investigations. That's all we want. That's all I want the government to say. Just say that. I'll trust them. But there we go. Should be a criminal inquiry into Johnson. I would find it absolutely astonishing if it weren't the case that Boris Johnson has committed a number of very serious criminal offences with regard... I mean, the fact that we have put the son of a Russian spy, and someone himself, it's not like that he's just the son of a Russian spy, right? He's also someone who derives his wealth from Putin's patronage. Like, Evgeny Lebedev is... and he's in the House of Lords. He's a parliamentarian. And if you want absolute proof that Evgeny Lebedev is a Russian asset, then look no further than the fact that when he was elevated to the House of Lords, first of all, Boris Johnson had to ram the appointment through. The House of Lords the Appointments Committee, they resisted quite fiercely. And Boris Johnson absolutely insisted on it. But secondly, you know, he took the title like Lord of Siberia. Now, in order to do that, because Siberia is in Russia, in order to do that, he had to get permission from the Russian government, who gave it because they think it's a great laugh. They think it's a great laugh that a Russian, someone close to the Russian government, someone who has the support of the Russian government, is in the British Parliament. It should be a national humiliation. And that's how it's seen in Russia. And yet it's not how it's seen out here. Get Lebedev out the Lord's first step. Well, I mean, again, how do you do that? Unless, of course, you say you can't be in the House of Lords if you've got foreign citizenship. So he'd have to completely renounce Russian citizenship, maybe. You know, it's like, because there have been two steps so far. First of all, we know that the moves are now underway to completely bin all the hereditary peers. That gets rid of a fair number. There's dozens of those. The second step, which won't have any impact until the end of this parliament, is that any peer that turns 80 before the general election will have to resign after that general election. So you don't resign as soon as you turn 80. It's just as soon as you turn 80, at the following general election, after it, you will then leave the House of Lords. So those are two measures that have come in now-ish. Neither of those would do anything about Lebedev. Neither of them would do that. But there we go. Derek said, I can't believe Phil's gone off on a complete tangent because of my joke about super chats. Oh, I go off on tangent. I'm very easily distracted. Incredibly easy, which is why when I started growing this channel, I insisted I had to do scripts, because otherwise I would just go off and they'd go up far too long, and then I would still forget things. Do I think our Secret Service will do that? Our intelligence services will do whatever they're told. There's no real separation like there is in America. They're under the direct orders of the government. So there's no separation at all, really, as far as I understand it. There are some bodies in this country where there's a bit of separation. There's not really for the intelligence services. They're directly under the over. I mean, obviously they'll get up to things without always telling the ministers, but there we go. Bojo facing serious questions over business with uranium entrepreneur. Oh, there's so many things that really Boris Johnson should be held to account for. But I would start with the big stuff, and that is the way he's potentially compromised over. Begin with that party in Italy, where he slipped his security detail. The problem is, I suppose, if the government sort of go after that, it looks like a political witch hunt. I suppose in many ways what I'd actually want is just make sure that our security services work on the assumption that there's a serious amount of Russian influence in our politics, because there is, and ask them to actively look. Don't just say to them the order to not look for it is rescinded. Tell them to actually set up a unit to look specifically for that. And you can base it, if you want justification, all the evidence, start with the evidence that America's already collected. They've published a lot of it. We don't have to ask them for it. They've published it. Start with that, because it names the UK. It covers some of the evidence that they've published covers interference in the UK. John saying that I do believe the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has overextended Russian interference. It's made people sit up and take notice, was ignored before. It certainly has not gone according to plan or according to Putin's plans, definitely. It also provides the political cover for ordering these investigations. I mean, we always should have done that first. I'm saying I missed a comment, very possibly, sorry. You may have to say it again. Oh, no, it's there. Obsession is a funny word, not as inhumorous as someone who's ND have special interests, and some people refer to those as obsessions, for instance. Well, they can be, but at the moment, Labour are utterly obsessed. I mean, obsession literally is when you focus on a thing to the exclusion of all others, which, you know, many people will naturally do. But it's a bit odd when an entire government does it. How much scrutiny politicians put under by the Secret Service would a solution be to put them under high surveillance? So intelligence services do prepare, like, you know, information on anyone who might become a senior politician. For example, if, like, when Boris Johnson became Foreign Secretary, at that point, the intelligence service, as soon as Theresa May was even thinking about appointing him, the cabinet secretary, presumably at the time, would have said, you know, you always have to, before you make appointments, there's sort of supposed to be a process whereby, shall we have a look if there's anything dodgy in their intelligence file? And it doesn't mean that the Prime Minister will go through it and learn all their secrets or anything, but if there's anything which should potentially exclude them from that post, it will be brought to their attention. So it will have been brought to Theresa May's attention that Boris Johnson had a few dodgy skeletons in his closet. And there was a suggestion, although again this was denied, so, you know, take it with a pinch of salt, but there was a suggestion that because Boris Johnson was known to be vulnerable to Russian interference years and years ago, this was years ago, that when he was made foreign secretary, the foreign secretary normally has oversight over MI6. And it was believed, or it was claimed, that Theresa May shifted things around so that Boris Johnson did not have oversight over MI6. Now, this was denied. I don't know whether we can say it's true or not, but it was heavily suggested at the time. And if that is true, then that means that Theresa May definitely was told by intelligence services, yeah, you probably shouldn't make him foreign secretary. And maybe what she did, and this is all speculation, maybe what she did is say, look, we'll make him foreign secretary, but we'll move, you know, we'll shift the lines of supervision over MI6 somewhere. But that is what's supposed to happen. Everyone is supposed to be vetted. But they can't block you. Our intelligence services can't block it. We know that it wasn't just the House of Lords Appointments Committee that objected to Evgeny Lebedev being put in the House of Lords. Our own intelligence services also objected. That is, again, a matter of record. And yet Boris Johnson completely ignored it. There are some people as well, like Guy Verhofstadt, for example, as one such person. There are some people who, because we know from the evidence that's been turned over in America, one of the lines that came out, this wasn't in the latest indictment, this is from an earlier one, but one of the lines that came out from Russia Today was, so someone was asking them what line to take on a particular thing, and they basically were saying, whatever causes chaos is our line. So the whole purpose of Russia Today, as well as the various fingers in various pies around the world, is to create disorder in Western countries. You know, everything that Russia has been doing internationally has been for one of two reasons. One, to enrich Putin directly, which includes the attempted invasion of Ukraine, so he can feed his oligarchs. And the second is to create disorder in Western countries. And for example, one of the things that Russia's doing is creating a lot of instability in Africa to create refugee crises. And where do a lot of them go? They try to go to Europe. It's not just the UK. I mean, we make a big song and dance about asylum in the UK. We get hardly any asylum seekers in the UK. Mostly they're hitting places like Greece or Italy, and or Germany actually. So yeah, you know, they're creating discord wherever they can, and they're obviously paying people in the UK and America probably easiest because we're the most vulnerable to it, but other countries as well. We know that Marine Le Pen, and this is why the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has backfired to an extent on Putin, because Marine Le Pen, remember, she was in hock to Putin. Like, she basically borrowed money from him, and she needed her party needed to have it paid off before the recent elections in France because it was a very bad look. You know, people like Le Pen, people like Maloney, people like Wilders, who were very, very explicitly pro-Putin a few years ago. And now it's a bit like, oh, Putin, yeah, we're not actually best buds at all. I'm in Russia, not just the odd week or so. He'd spent some time in Russia. Inevitably, he will be part of it as well. But again, you know, what you need is not just this mountain of circumstantial evidence. What we actually need is actual proof of causal links. And for that, you need an actual investigation, an explicit investigation. What we actually need is for the government in this country to order an investigation by the intelligence services. And maybe they've already done it. Maybe they've already done it. Maybe it's going to be one of those things that's behind the scenes for fear of like alarming the public or something like that. I mean, maybe there's all sorts of possible reasons why they might not want to go public with it. Not the least of which is because, one, it might spook the horses. Remember, there are certain people in this country that we think are definitely paid Russian assets. I'm going to suggest Nigel Farage will definitely be worth investigating. And maybe, you know, if you announce an investigation, you make it more difficult to gather the evidence. Or maybe they just don't want to basically have to announce to the public, yeah, we're really... It's the same thing with Brexit, isn't it? Having to focus on the fact that the Tory deal was weak instead of just saying that Brexit is crap. It's not just about upsetting some people who think that we can still somehow make Brexit work. It's the fact that you'd basically be having to admit, yeah, this is all crap and there's nothing we can do about it. Because actually Labour can't just say, oh, well, we'll just join the single market then. No, we can't. You know, so it's like the same thing with the Russian interference. If the problem is so big, would it be like the government saying, yeah, we've got this really massive problem and it's going to take a long time to fix, and in the meantime, we're incredibly vulnerable? Maybe they don't want to have to say that. I don't know. Why has Starmer reneged on his promise to reform the House of Lords? He hasn't. And what you'll have to say in what way you think he has reneged, because the answer to that question is he hasn't. He's doing exactly what he said he would do. Putin doesn't care if you're far right or far left, as long as you can upset the equilibrium. He doesn't care where you are. If he can pay you to do something, he will do. Because all this money, it's peanuts. I said it in that video earlier this week. This company in America were paid like $10 million. Peanuts. You know, Putin would spend $1 billion easily a year on paying people to push his propaganda, if they can do it well enough, if they can get it out to enough people. But it is interesting. You do get this thing when people go, oh, there's no such thing as the horseshoe theory. And then Russia like gives the game away, because there's an awful lot of figures on the far left and the far right that when it comes to Russia's talking points use exactly this. Not just that they express the same views. It's the same language they use. They use the same words because they've been given those words written down in return for dosh. Whether directly or indirectly, not all of them will be seeing that dosh go into their own bank account. Maybe it's going towards various groups that they're trying to build up. But, you know, it's the same words. When you use the same words, it's clear it's coming from some central source. Russia's in trouble. The reliance on China economically needed North Korea for weapons. Yeah, that was fairly humiliating. Actually, needed to buy weapons from North Korea. That was humiliating, or it should have been. And yet, at the same time, although Russia, yes, Russia is basically now making itself China's bitch. China is nonetheless propping it up. If Brexit was brought to us by criminal means, then should it not invalidate the result, and all those involved criminality will have to start singing? It doesn't invalidate the result, no, because we've done it. It's finished. I actually saw there was a comment by someone I follow suggesting that they didn't think, because they were trying to quote, they're really reaching here, I'm afraid. It says, Clause 1 of Article 50 states, any member state may decide to withdraw from the Union in accordance with its own constitutional requirements. And they're trying to say that because the referendum was based on lies and it was corrupt, that was contrary to the constitutional requirement that a mandatory vote may not be perverted by law breaking. No. Because, and this came out very clearly from the courts, Article 50 was not triggered as a result of the referendum result. It's quite true that the referendum result did not give the legal right for the government to trigger Article 50. But Article 50 in the UK was not triggered as a result of the referendum vote. It was triggered as a result of a vote in Parliament, which satisfies the constitutional requirements. The Conservatives, as much as people may not like it, the Conservatives had their mandate for us to leave the EU because they promised a referendum on leaving the EU in their manifesto. They won a majority, so they had the public mandate for that. The referendum result, which was illegal, the court said so, it was run illegally, but it was also non-advisory, which is why the courts did not invalidate the referendum result, because they said the referendum result was advisory anyway. But because the result was the result it was, it gave Parliament the power to say that they then had the mandate to trigger the exit process. So they did. It was all perfectly constitutional. It's just, it shouldn't have been. We should have had a stronger constitution, that's all. One that said that in order to instigate a major constitutional change that would impact in a major way the whole of the UK, you would probably have to say that as well as Westminster, the Westminster Parliament voting for it, I would say you should have 2 of the 3 other Parliament stroke assemblies vote in favour as well. And given that neither the Welsh Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, nor I believe the Northern Ireland Assembly would have voted in favour of it, that would have been enough. And I think that should be something. If you're going to have a major, because we have this thing in this country where no parliament, well, it applies in any country that's got parliament, I suppose, no parliament can tie the hands of the next parliament. But actually with something like Brexit it can, because you can leave unilaterally, but you can't go back unilaterally. And also you can leave a lot quicker than you can go back, and it took us long enough to leave. So really we should, and it's too late for this now, but I mean we should have had different things. We first of all should have really thought about how we conduct referenda, and actually decided that, because it's all right saying a referendum's advisory, but it never is. Realistically, it's not advisory. So, for example, with the Brexit referendum, because you can't possibly know the terms of exit because it's a result of a negotiation, there should have been 2. The legislation should have set out 2. One is for permission to begin negotiations for the terms of exit. And the second, when the government have decided that they've got their terms of exit, to issue a second referendum to confirm that that is indeed what we want to do. And the other part of it is just in terms of making those changes. You know, we have, like, the problem with the UK is it's a federal country without enough federal infrastructure. But what federal infrastructure we do have comes from devolved parliaments and assemblies. So use them. They should be included. But anyway. Scotland went to court to challenge the vote, got knocked back if memory serves. It would do, because legally the national parliament can do what it like what I'm describing is not the way things are, the way things should be. But the way things are is that Westminster could do what it wants collectively. It's not the government, remember, it's Parliament. If Parliament votes for a thing, it can do a thing. Did I check what I said about Labour allowing 6 new badger licences and a few influence? I did. You did mention that a while ago. I don't know from where the influence is from. I know they've said that they'll stop them by the end of the Parliament. I know that's not necessarily really good enough, but who knows? It may be influence because Labour now have a lot of rural MPs. It may be related to that. Labour were complicit in supporting triggering Article 50 in Parliament without any scrutiny. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that was a problem. It was actually ironic. We had the Conservatives who had been held hostage by the Brexiteers, but who had a leader that didn't want to leave. And then we had Labour, which is a very, pro-EU party and always has been. Well, I say always has been. In my lifetime has been, ever since we joined the EEC at least, and just before it indeed, who had a bloody Brexiteer for the leader for the first time ever. I mean, the way, Brexit, literally, there's probably, you could probably come up with about a dozen things, a dozen factors, which if they hadn't applied, wouldn't have happened. Brexit was a complete alignment of the most malignant stars in the heavens. Nigel Farage, you would think Nigel Farage was personally very effective. If Nigel Farage had never been a Nazi, then we wouldn't have had Brexit if it weren't for Nigel Farage. Boris Johnson, if Boris Johnson hadn't been persuaded to become a Brexiteer in order to attract support to become leader at some point in the future, wouldn't have happened. I don't think it would have happened without Boris Johnson. Wouldn't have happened without Dominic Cummings. Wouldn't have happened without Steve Bannon and his Cambridge Analytica. Wouldn't have happened if Russia didn't see benefit in it. Wouldn't have happened if we'd have, the actual campaign, the Remain campaign, was headed up by David Cameron, who was personally very unpopular. We know from polling afterwards, some people who voted leave voted just to stick 2 fingers up at David Cameron for his austerity. It wouldn't have happened if Labour had have had a leader that actually didn't want us to leave the EU. Or if we'd have just not had those people leave the Remain campaign. The Leave camp, there were multiple Leave campaigns. There were 2 big ones. And neither of them had, heads of parties running them. They were just random politicians. We should have had that for the Remain campaign. It says Labour in their 1983 general election manifesto. Yeah, that Michael Foot's a different thing. You are referring to a small part of the longest suicide note in history. Or as it was at the time. But yes, okay, Michael Foot, fine. Didn't last long, did he? David Cameron could have imposed a second referendum and 2/3 majority requirement, would still have complied with his manifesto pledge. Yeah, well, he could have done, but remember, the only reason he didn't want it in the manifesto at all, the reason it was in the manifesto was because he was fearing splits in his party. But constitutionally, the way we left the EU was all perfectly constitutional. Parliament voted to trigger the process to leave the EU. And then, in terms of the hard Brexit, because you could say, well, the referendum didn't include anything about leaving the single market and customs union. It's no, but it also didn't preclude it. And by the time we left the single market and customs union, then the Conservatives had a mandate for that as well, because it was in their 2019 manifesto. They won a majority, and then that gave them the mandate for everything in the 2019 manifesto. Pronator saying, I've heard Blair should have led the Remain campaign, given he was very pro-EU. Good public speaker, had shut Farage down on the matter before. Would this have been smart? I don't know. Because people might also have voted against it to stick 2 fingers up at Tony Blair as well. Tony Blair lost a lot of popularity by the time he stopped being Prime Minister. So although all of those things are true, and he is a very good public speaker and all the rest of it, it would have been better. Would it still have been good? I mean, I don't know. Maybe not. I would maybe have steered clear of anyone that would, like, maybe it shouldn't have even been politicians as such. But anyway. I wonder what this country had been like if Tony Blair had never gone to war in Iraq. So, I mean, people keep coming back to this one. It was, yeah, there were a lot of consequences tumbled out of that one. And it could have been very, very different without it. Yeah, there was a lot of, not just international, but domestic, because it's like chaos theory, isn't it? Like this one little thing and leads to lots of things that you wouldn't have thought would be related, but they were. For example, the war in Iraq boosted Jeremy Corbyn's profile, without which he may not have won the leadership campaign. He may have done, it may not. It's very difficult to say in some cases. The problem with the Iraq war as well is because for quite a long time I just supposed, wrongly as it turns out, that Tony Blair just got himself into a bind, because the way it appeared to me as it was happening from the outside, so to speak, was it was quite clear Bush, because he was trying to tie it to Al-Qaeda, and we know that actually Saddam Hussein hated Al-Qaeda. So it was absolute nonsense. We know why Bush really wanted it, because he didn't like the oil sanctions that had been placed on Iraq, because that hurt his business interests. So he wanted, his view obviously was like, we need these oil sanctions gone. We can't remove them unless Saddam Hussein complies with the international community. He's not going to. So why don't we just remove him under some bollocks pretext? And I just thought to myself that Tony Blair looked at the situation and thought, bloody hell, no, because you'll make a right arse of it. And he tried to get international consensus, so less of an arse would be made of it, and then didn't. But because in order to get Bush to not do anything precipitous, he'd said, look, I will back you, but give me time to get an international coalition together. And because he'd given that promise, he then had to stick to it. But that is not apparently exactly what happened, because Tony Blair still today insists. And I've seen more recently a few other people who were involved with the discussions who were basically, apparently Tony Blair actually thought it was a good idea. It's mad. Absolutely mad, isn't it? Although we'll never really know. I don't really know why he thought it was a good idea. But also, he's not exactly one for apologising either. I mean, if you look at the Grenfell thing this week, so we had Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer who've apologised. I mean, we sort of know neither of them personally had a lot to apologise for. But nonetheless, they made that apology on behalf of their parties. And then Tony Blair was asked, because the report names opportunities missed during Blair's time in government. And all he had to do was say, yeah, and he was trying to talk about the way that government works and how these things can be missed. But all he had to do was say, yeah, we messed up on that one. That's all really anyone needed to say. No one's holding any politicians criminally responsible. The ones who are criminally responsible are the people who falsified safety or used the wrong safety information for the cladding that was being used. It was the builders, the landlords, in a couple of cases, cladding manufacturers. They're the ones who are really responsible. Not the politicians are responsible for not doing enough to protect, but that's not criminally responsible. So I really don't see why he couldn't have just come out like everyone else and just said, yeah, I mean, yeah, the report was grim reading. We didn't see it like that at the time, but that's how it's come out. And, I'm sorry. That's all he had to do. And then they could have moved on. He's incapable, isn't he? Whereas you compare someone like Gordon Brown, And Gordon Brown does actually own up to mistakes. Like, you know. Ugh. But anyway, done. It's done. He's finished. He's in the past. I know he's sort of not, because he runs like a lobby group and think tank and stuff like that. But then again, he's hardly the most malignant player on the stage there. Matthew there saying Iraq tainted Blair's domestic achievements. Can't praise Blair without people mentioning the war. Well, certain people, a certain group, but yeah, it gave an easy stick to beat anyone with over that. But there were, I mean, the thing is, there were plenty of domestic stuff to criticise him for as well. You know, it was net good. The last Labour government did way, way more good than bad. But there was bad. There were things domestically you could absolutely beat him up for. But you're right. I mean, everyone just comes back to this, which is an incredibly lazy argument. But it is what it is. One of you Peggy there saying, so a convo with Graham yesterday about languages taught in schools. Would I agree with me that considering Norwegian and Dutch are more similar to English, should the curriculum start there? I would say probably not, because if you're going to, like, if you had the capacity to teach a foreign language young enough for it to take effect, you'd have to do it on the basis of what's going to be the best economically for us. So you'd have to do it based on a language with where we do the most business. So I would suggest French or German, probably. Whereas there's not enough country, like, there's not enough country, like Norwegians don't even like Norwegian. I've known some, like when I used to do a lot of online gaming, there were, because in Scandinavian countries they teach English from, it's actually quite weird, because sometimes you'd be playing with someone who's still at school and they'd be saying, oh no, they've got an English test the next day, they're really worried. I'm thinking, mate, you're fluent, how can you not pass an English test? But we say China, the problem is there are multiple languages in China which you pick, and it's bloody difficult. So there is, in terms of, you know, I'll take the point about ease of learning the language. I would suggest a language that has a common root, but also one where a lot of commerce takes place with people who speak that language. So I would say French or German. Say, don't do German, it's hard enough as a German. I no, see, when I was learning, I learned French and German. I chose to learn German. I found German a much easier language to pick up than French, because it makes sense. There's a logic to German. As I was saying to Graham, get rid of like your gender pronouns. They're not needed. A desk doesn't have a gender. Behave yourself. I mean, in this country, we're not as bad. We have like one. I mean, I think to myself, you think to yourself, how much aggro, confected aggro, does it cause in this country about personal pronouns? You know, like J.K. Rowling, I'm not calling them her, it's a man. And it's like, bloody hell, it's a word, just use it, will you? And yet, I think to myself, so how much worse must this be in countries where the language has very strict rules on gender for like things that don't have a gender? So, you know, English is quite useful in terms of we don't have too much frippery like that. We have the. The is just, that's it. There's one the. There's one a or an. But, you know, we don't actually need gender pronouns at all. We could just have, you know, we often say in this country, like, you know, you might say he said or she said, but you can just as easily say they said. No one would bat an eyelid. That's quite common. You could just say that. And if we just said that, if we didn't have he or she or his or her, there's no need for it in English. You can actually get away without using any of those words. Without anyone thinking, that's a bit weird. Why would they say that? You can just say they or their. Easy. And we often do. But German, for me, was very logical. French was not at all. French was worse than Latin in some ways. It wasn't actually worse than Latin, but it seemed to be as bad. You know, you'd have, okay, this is the rule for this, and then here's the big long list of times when we break that rule. Why even have it? Can Farage speak German? I don't know. His wife's German, isn't she? I imagine Farage can read German. He sounds like the sort of person to me who would have learnt German so he could read Mein Kampf in the original script? I think he probably can, but I actually don't know. Spanish and French are the languages of most spoken countries around the world, but it's not about the number of people that speak the language around the world. It's about the number of people that speak the language with whom you want to do commerce. So it's sort of like because you're basically talking about people working in probably banking or legal services, like the international service industry. It doesn't really matter for someone who's going to get a job in a butcher's. Do you know what I mean? It's for people who, so that they can actually work and maybe their own business. Maybe they need to contact companies in other countries as well. But so you're more likely to do business with someone who can, if they can speak. I mean, a lot of them can speak English already, and that doesn't matter. But if you're going to do business with someone who doesn't speak English, if you're in Britain, it's probably going to be someone who can speak French or German. Like, even if you're doing business with someone in the Netherlands, because they've got like 5 languages in their head at once. So on the off chance they can't actually speak English, which would be remarkable, they probably speak either French or German. English is the international language, hence why most Brits cannot speak a second language, even though the UK has so many accents. I think also it's laziness, though. It's laziness. But the thing is, like, it's not the government couldn't just announce let's do a second language, because yes, English is spoken, like, for a lot of countries it's really obvious which second language to learn. In a lot of countries it's English, right? But for us it wouldn't be as obvious, French or German, which would you pick? But also we just don't have the teachers to do it. It's a bit like, this came up when I was talking to Graham as well on education matters. I was taught programming at primary school and the first couple of years of comprehensive school, secondary school, right? Then it stopped. Now, I didn't know at the time why it stopped. It just stopped. And but I found out many years later the reason it stopped is because Thatcher stopped it, because apparently businesses had said to her, yeah, we're not bothered about programming skills. What we want is people who can do IT. So she just binned it, failing to understand that we had a growing computer industry that would need those skills. The average business might not, but the country did. So she binned it. So now we're at this situation where even the Conservatives a few years ago realised that this was a mistake. And they've tried to reintroduce computers, but we don't have we don't have people. Computing skills are so rare in this country that if you are able to teach programming, you're able to earn a lot more money by doing programming. It's like the Oscar Wilde thing, those who can do, those who can't teach, which is a bit unfair, but for certain things is absolutely true. If where there's a shortage of those skills, it's likely to be true. There may be some people who just really enjoy teaching and have those skills and will want to be a teacher, but they can make way more money by being a programmer. And that's the problem we have. Whereas English teachers are 2 a penny. Well, as in people who are qualified to teach English. We have a ridiculous number of English graduates and not that many jobs that need an English degree. And there's certain other degrees as well. Mark said now, left teaching to be a developer. I left teaching to be an internet gobshite. But that was, again, a whole sequence of events like Brexit where certain stars aligned, any one of which hadn't happened, and this wouldn't have happened, but there it is. You say the level of grammar in the UK is a point, i.e. Lee Anderson. No, Lee Anderson is not a common... Like, people will say things like, oh, it's so common when you talk like that, but he's not common. Most people would not say what he said. There are things that are quite common around the country. People will say, for example, I'm trying to think of an example now. I had it and then it's just gone. Oh, never mind. I can't think of it now. I still find it vaguely funny when someone can't work out basic old English, like... I'm not reading that one. I'll get it wrong. Yeah, but we don't learn that. We don't need to learn it. William said, I only became partially fluent in German by being in Germany and the US Army for 4 years. Only approach any fluency in Spanish when I spend time in a Spanish-speaking country. Well, I wasn't too bad because I liked it. I had a Polish uncle who spoke German. He sort of, when he found out I was learning German, because we would visit them every summer, and he would like teach me a bit of German. But also, because I liked learning German, I used to watch German television, and I used to watch shows that were actually American or British shows with which I was familiar, like Quantum Leap and stuff like that, and which were dubbed. So I'd be watching a program where I sort of knew what was going on because I'd seen it in English, but listening to the German dubbing. And I will never forget the German Popeye. It's hilarious. The actual guy who does the dubbing for Popeye, because his laugh sounds like a machine gun. And it sort of does, I suppose, the American one, but it's quite spectacular, the German one. But that's what I used to do, and I got quite good at it. I actually got 100% in my GCSE German. You know, I did get quite good. I could converse at a basic level. I wouldn't call myself fluent, and I've forgotten it all now. I can probably count, but I've forgotten it all. But it did come in useful a few years later. I was playing an online game, and someone found themselves. They couldn't speak English. I don't know why they were on the English-speaking server. There's a German server. And I was trying to help them out. And usually you find people in Britain, Graham was suggesting this, you usually find yourself, even when talking to someone who's not fluent in English, speaking English anyway, because they tend to be better at English than you are at their language. But on this occasion, it was not at all the case. We ended up speaking German because I was better at German than they were at English. I don't know why they were on that server, but that was a long time ago, as I never kept it up, and it's now all completely gone. And I sometimes think I should just learn again, you know, get one of these online programs, learn again. But then I think, why? I'm not going anywhere. I don't go anywhere. I don't like travelling. So I would never use it, which is a shame. Did I see Starmer calling someone like the Prime Minister in PMQs? Yeah, I did it multiple times. Apparently it was 5. I certainly caught it multiple times. I know a lot of people just make fun of it, and it's like, fine, but he probably should. It's also, to me, if it had happened once, it's a slip, right? But to me, it's a lack of focus doing it so many times. And I think it's, you know, yeah, it should be more focused. It's not the most serious thing, but it is a sign to me that he's not really, you know, maybe he's not getting enough sleep or something like that. You ought to look at that. Because if you can slip up like that, you can slip up in another way, and he wants to be careful. Oh, Christine, hello from Atlanta, Georgia. We were actually just talking about America at the start of the show, but never mind. We have run out. I'm going to have to go back down to the doggies. Putting 80 down, fluent in numbers. Yes, so am I. I much prefer numbers. Give me an equation I feel far more comfortable in my safe space mathematics. I'm apparently the outlier. Well, indeed, I always find it very odd that, like, people don't like to admit that they don't know things. They don't like to admit it. It's like they feel stupid if they're things they don't know. Except when it comes to maths. People almost seem proud of the fact they're bad at maths. Oh, I'm terrible at maths. And like it's the one area of important skill that people do not feel at all embarrassed about, which is mad, isn't it? Like, if you try and suggest that someone, you probably don't know the capital cities of these countries, they'll feel aggrieved. I probably will. Don't test me, but I probably will. Like, they'll feel stupid if they don't know the capital of, like, Brazil or something, and yet they'll quite happily say they're bad at maths. And this always does my head in. And yet, these same people who will happily say, oh yeah, I'm terrible at maths, think they can read a graph or a poll or a survey or something, and they can infer all the information from it. And it's like, this is one of the most advanced forms of mathematics you will learn. And so you reckon you're really bad at the easy maths, but you can do the difficult maths, do you? Do you? But there we go. Maths is not, it's actually not once. It is until you. What I find is, as soon as you understand certain basics, the problem we have in the UK, and it probably applies to other countries as well, is we have this system of teaching which is not based on progress, which is mad. So what happens is, in year one, it's like, right, you should learn these things. And then in year two, you should learn these things. And it carries on. These are the things you should learn each year. And the way you progress, and the thing is, maths is not, there are some subjects which are knowledge-based, and there are some subjects which are skills-based. And mathematics is very skills-based. But we don't teach it like that. So the way you progress onto the next level is by simply surviving to be a year older. We don't ever... what we should do is say, look, these are the building blocks of maths. Once you've mastered these, then you move on to the next stage. And it doesn't matter how old you are when this happens or in what year you are. You should have classes designed around where people actually are. Because we completely waste our time to the point where by the time they come to me, well, when I was teaching in secondary school, it's like, you haven't learned the building blocks and yet I'm now expected to teach you this. I shouldn't. I should go back and teach you the other stuff. And you would actually come out, you know, so not everyone will come out at the same level. It always works on the basis that everyone comes out at the same level at the end of it. No. Mental arithmetic is hell again because no one teaches it properly, or not no one. Like the teachers will try, and some will be very good, but they're constrained by this mad way of teaching it. Like if you go, you know, when I learnt judo, for example, there was no right. You've been here for 4 weeks. We're now going to learn this. It was like no. Your first thing you learn how to break fall. You learn how to roll. You learn like a couple of moves, and that's it. Once you did those, then you moved on. There was no set time. There was no schedule. You moved on when you'd mastered the beginner skills. Then you did the next set of skills. Then you did the next set. And you did it at your own pace. But we don't do that in education because it's bollocks. But anyway, good at saying that. Final question here. With my system, what would happen if someone struggles with relatively basic maths throughout the entire time at school? Then if they struggle with that basic maths, they're not going to learn anything beyond it anyway because it's too hard. Like algebra, for example, equations. You can't learn how to rearrange equations until you can do fractions. Learn fractions first. And if it takes you 10 years to learn, it takes you 10, you will come out at the end of that 11 years, knowing more than you will with the current system. Because that's the thing, you know, you're trying to teach someone, it's like trying to teach someone to read before they've, like you would never in English teach someone to read before they understood what to recognize each individual letter. You have to get them to recognize the letters, and then you start to build up how they sound in different words, and then you start to build up how combinations of letters sound, and then you work on individual words because sometimes they break the rules. There are sometimes words spelt the same way that are pronounced in two different ways depending on the context. So you do go through a bit of a sequence in English in a way that they just don't in maths. So, you know, in some parts of teaching we understand the concept and in other parts we don't. And you know, what belt did I get to? Like blue. I didn't do it for long enough. As soon as I went to basically I had an accident when I was just before I went to university, and then I went to university and I got drinking and doing badminton instead. But there we go. And then you meet OUGH, yeah, exactly. So, but there is a sequence when you're learning to read. And there should be the same, except even then, by the time, you know, once you can learn to read to a basic level, then they do the same in English, don't they? But then a lot of English that you learn on the national curriculum is more knowledge than skills based anyway. The skill is basically reading and writing once you've done that. But anyway, we've completely run out of time. I told you I was easily distracted. We'll have to leave it there. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a brilliant rest of evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.